10 years after I stood in for my brother at his own wedding, he suddenly came back. The whole family stared at him in dead silence. He yawned, stretching lazily as he spoke. 13 countries.
Man, I am exhausted.
Where's Lily? She must be in elementary school by now. Why isn't she here to greet her real dad? Lily is my brother's daughter. 10 years ago, he suddenly announced he had a child. Then, on the day of his wedding, he faked his own death, abandoning both his newborn daughter and his fiancée. The Vance family is New York old money royalty. My parents didn't dare offend them. Desperate, they practically gift-wrapped me, a fresh college graduate, and shipped me off to the altar. For the past 10 years, I've been a devoted husband and a loving father. Now, watching my brother act like he owned the place. My parents turned their hesitant eyes toward me. I just smiled faintly. Lily and her mother are on vacation in the Bahamas. Hearing this, Julian frowned, his face twisting in annoyance. Didn't I tell you guys I was coming home? Didn't you tell Audrey I'd be back? I calmly took a sip of my coffee. 10 years of navigating the business world had changed me. I was no longer the invisible, quiet kid living in my brother's shadow. My silence pushed Julian over the edge. He slammed his hand on the table and stood up, his voice screeching. Ethan, what is that supposed to mean? Don't forget, I was the one betrothed to the Vance family. Now that I'm back, did you really think you could keep playing the wealthy son-in-law? I glanced up at him and chuckled. Julian, I have no idea what you're talking about. My wife and I are doing great. Over the years, I had accompanied Audrey Vance to countless charity galas and high society events. We were known as the golden couple of New York's elite. Audrey's image as a devoted family woman had earned her massive respect and lucrative deals from her business partners. Maybe there was no burning romance between Audrey and me, but we shared something far stronger than love. Leverage. Mutual benefit. And that was exactly why I was so confident. Julian looked at me in disbelief. He pointed a trembling finger at my face.
Ethan.
Have you no shame? Audrey was supposed to be mine. I set my coffee cup down and replied calmly, with absolute dignity.
No.
Audrey and I are legally married. My gaze was firm. I stood up, completely done with this circus. Our parents stood by, looking utterly helpless. Julian lunged forward, grabbing our mother's arm.
Mom.
He's insane. Audrey and I were together all through college. If it weren't for my connection to the Vances, how could our family business have grown this big? My parents had always favored Julian. But this time, Mom stole a glance at my cold expression before mumbling in a weak voice. But you ran away, Julian. You even faked your own death. We didn't hear a single word from you for 10 years. There was no groom at the altar. If Ethan hadn't stepped in, the Vance family would have been humiliated. They would have ruined us, and our company would have gone bankrupt. Julian froze for a split second, stammering to defend himself. I just wasn't ready for marriage back then. But I'm back now, aren't I? Besides, you know how arrogant the Vances are. They always looked down on our family. If I had married into their family back then, I would have been treated like a dog. I would have been humiliated every day. My eyes grew cold as I asked, then why are you back now? Julian answered as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Because the Vances have accepted you now. That means they'll accept me too. It's perfect. I'll take over as Audrey's husband. I'm sure they won't treat me too badly now. Lily can finally be with her real dad. It's a win-win for everyone. With that, he took a few steps forward and grabbed my hands, looking at me with forced sincerity. Ethan, you're free. You can finally go and find your own happiness. I stared blankly into his eyes. Those clear eyes carried the absolute, cruel naivety of a child who had been spoiled his entire life. A naivety that was sickening. He genuinely believed that I, the neglected younger brother, was born to sacrifice myself for him. With a cold laugh, I yanked my hands away. I'm perfectly happy with my life, Julian. You're the one who needs a reality check. I turned and walked out of that heartless house. I didn't care what Julian was feeling behind my back. It couldn't be anything good. But I knew his stubborn, petulant nature all too well. He wouldn't give up easily. Exhausted, I drove back to the Vance estate. Lately, I had been buried in corporate projects, working late into the night almost every day. As I walked through the door, I massaged my aching temples. An hour ago, when my parents texted me on Snapchat that my brother was back, my entire body had frozen. I always knew this day might come, but when it actually did, it still caught me off guard. I hung my briefcase on the rack and spotted a pair of high heels on the floor. I blinked, quickly forcing my usual polite, perfect smile onto my face. "You're back," a warm voice called out. I turned around. Audrey was wearing a black lace nightgown. Even in simple sleepwear, her stunning curves, porcelain skin, and flawless features were captivating. A gentle smile played on her lips. She frowned slightly, concern washing over her face. Why do you look so exhausted? Haven't you been sleeping? I smiled. Just too many things at the office. Did you have fun on your trip? How is Lily? Audrey walked over and slid into my arms. She pressed her face against my chest, her slender fingers gently tracing my back as she whispered. Lily loved it. She was so tired she fell asleep immediately. The only pity was that you weren't there. Next time, we'll go as a family of 3. I missed you, she murmured, her voice laced with intimacy. I kissed her soft hair, but my heart felt as cold as ice. When her soft lips pressed against mine, my body stiffened. My mind was completely flooded with the venomous words Julian had said to me earlier. For the first time, I didn't kiss her back. Instead, I gently pushed her back, creating a small distance between us. I stopped mid-sentence because I felt Audrey's body freeze. My sharp instincts told me she was unhappy. After a long, tense silence, Audrey smiled, finding an excuse for me. You're just too tired. Go take a shower and get some sleep. She saved us from the awkwardness. With that, she gave me a quick peck on the cheek and let me go. I nodded and headed upstairs. Behind me, standing in the shadows, Audrey's expression darkened. The warmth drained from her face as her sharp gaze locked onto my retreating back. The next morning, I drove out of the estate to head to work. Right outside the residential gates, a familiar figure blocked my path. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Julian saw my car. He ran straight into the middle of the road, forcing me to slam on the brakes. The cars behind me honked furiously. It was morning rush hour. The neighborhood security guards rushed over, trying to pull Julian away. But Julian fought them off, screaming at the top of his lungs. Ethan, stop hiding in your car. You stole my woman. Have you no shame? His screeching voice drew the attention of everyone nearby. I pulled my car over to make sure I wasn't blocking the gate, then got out. I glared at him. Julian offered a smug smile, running a hand through his messy hair. He sneered. What? Embarrassed? Or are you afraid Audrey will dump you once she knows I'm back?
My voice was like ice.
Julian, you're harassing me. This is my final warning. Stay away from me. Julian didn't take my warning seriously at all. Instead, his smile turned triumphant. Stop acting. You're terrified. You've lived in my shadow your whole life, Ethan. It's only natural that you be jealous of me and try to steal my life. He took a few steps closer, leaning in to whisper in my ear. Too bad a parasite always gets thrown out in the end. I'll wait right here. When I see Audrey, I'll explain everything. She'll take me back. And Lily? She's my daughter. We share the same blood. You'll never be her real father. Without a word, I got back into my car and drove off. This time, Julian didn't block me. In the rearview mirror, I could see him smiling as my car sped away. A chill ran down my spine. Julian had been spoiled since childhood. He had no boundaries. Whenever things didn't go his way, he threw tantrums like a giant toddler. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. Over the past 10 years, I had poured my heart and soul into this marriage and my career. If we divorced, both Audrey and I would suffer massive financial and reputational losses. Audrey had a family empire to fall back on, but I only had myself. Sitting in my office, my mind drifted to the past. Back in elementary school, Julian spent every break playing basketball, never touching his homework. Afraid of the teacher's wrath, he would take my completed assignments and put his name on them. My parents always justified it. They said I was a straight-A student, so the teachers wouldn't mind if I forgot my homework. But Julian was different. If he didn't hand it in, the teachers would scold him in front of the whole class. A boy's pride was everything, they said. So, to save Julian's pride, my hard work was routinely stolen. Eventually, I learned to write 2 copies of every assignment just to keep the peace. In high school, Julian was the popular kid. He chased the prettiest girls, got into fights, and charmed his teachers. Even though his grades were terrible, his outgoing personality earned him tons of friends. His entire life, someone had always been there to clean up his messes. Meanwhile, I had to walk on eggshells, calculating every single step. In college, he met Audrey Vance at a music festival. They formed an indie rock band and played in local bars. For 2 months, while I was working 3 part-time jobs just to afford my tuition, they were living out their wild youth on stage. I thought that once I graduated, I would save enough money to escape my toxic family forever. Until one night, Julian stumbled home late, reeking of alcohol. My parents stayed up to make him soup and undressed him. The whole house revolved around him. But then, a drunken Julian dropped a bomb that shocked everyone. He was going to be a father. For weeks, a suffocating silence hung over the house. My parents were in a frenzy over the sudden scandal. I was busy working my summer jobs to save for my final year of tuition. The only relaxed person in the house was Julian. He had absolutely no concept of what being a father meant. To cover up the scandal, my parents kept him locked in the house. Meanwhile, our family negotiated a marriage alliance with the Vances. They agreed to hold the wedding after a paternity test proved the child was Julian's. Everything was set. The Vances had reluctantly accepted the arrangement. After all, if the scandal leaked, the Vance family name would be dragged through the mud, and their stock prices would plunge. The night before the wedding, I took a 4-hour train ride home to attend. But the next morning, Julian vanished. The bridal suite was left with nothing but baby Lily in her crib and a room full of furious Vances. Audrey's face was dark, while my parents stood trembling in the corner. Then, their eyes slowly drifted to me. My mother grabbed me, as if I were a lifeline. "We have another son. He's never even been in a relationship. We'll give him to you to make up for this." My father immediately chimed in.
Yes.
"Ethan, hurry. Your brother is gone. You have to take his place." I stood frozen, my mind unable to process their words. Before I could speak, my parents grabbed my arms, trying to drag me into the dressing room to force me into a tuxedo. I struggled against them, my heart sinking into a bottomless abyss. Anger and disbelief clashed violently inside me. I had lived the first 20 years of my life in Julian's shadow. Now, they wanted me to sacrifice the rest of my life for him too? The sheer injustice of it made my throat tight. For the first time in my life, I snapped. I screamed and yanked my hands free.
Why?
Why do I have to pay for his selfishness? This is his mess, not mine. My father's hand flew across my face, delivering a vicious slap. "Julian is your family." I stumbled back, my cheek burning with pain. My mother sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "What Julian did was terrible, I know. But you can't just watch our family get ruined. The guests are already waiting in the chapel." My face went pale. I forced the words out through grit teeth. "I am not getting married." No matter how much they begged or tried to push me, I refused to budge. I grabbed a fruit knife from the table, pressed the blade against my neck, and hissed with bloodshot eyes. "If anyone forces me, I'll end it right here." At that, everyone froze. I didn't care if they were worried about my life or just terrified of the legal mess a suicide would cause. It didn't matter. I had already graduated. Once I got a job, my freedom would be absolute. The room fell into a tense standoff. Finally, Audrey suggested we speak in private. Everyone was ushered out of the room. In the dressing suite, only Audrey and I remained. 30 minutes later, the doors opened. I walked out in a tailored tuxedo, placing my hand flatly in Audrey's. With a smile that looked more painful than crying, I got married. My thoughts snapped back to the present. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my high-rise office, looking down at the city. It had taken me 10 years of blood, sweat, and tears to earn this office. Just as a sudden chill washed over me, a pair of arms wrapped around my waist from behind. I flinched slightly, but the sweet scent of cherry blossoms immediately put me at ease. "What are you thinking so hard about? You didn't even hear me walk in," a soft voice whispered in my ear. I smiled. "Just preparing for the business gala tomorrow." Audrey took my hand, looking up at me with a smile. "I believe in you, Ethan. Your capability is unquestionable." The corners of my lips curved upward. "Why did you come by the office? Isn't the headquarters busy?" "It's fine. I wanted to drive you home. Also, Lily mentioned she wants to see that new movie tomorrow." I nodded absent-mindedly. Audrey leaned up and pressed her lips to mine. I gently ruffled her hair. When we got home that night, there was no sign of Julian. He was surprisingly quiet. I figured my parents had locked him in his room to protect their own business interests, just like they did years ago. I was physically and mentally drained. The moment my head hit the pillow, I fell into a deep sleep. In the middle of the night, a warm, soft body wrapped tightly around me from behind. The next evening, the grand hall of the annual business gala was packed with elite guests mingling with champagne glasses in hand. After doing my rounds of socializing, I took a quick break and headed to the VIP lounge. Lily was sitting obediently on the plush sofa, waiting for me. Her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Are we still going to the movies after this, Daddy?" I smiled warmly, gently tapping her nose. "Of course. Have we ever broken a promise to you?" Lily giggled happily. Seeing her smile eased some of the tension in my chest. Still, since the start of the gala, I had been plagued by an uneasy feeling. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the heavy doors of the ballroom. As I scanned the crowd, my eyes locked onto a familiar figure and my entire body stiffened. Not far away, Julian was holding Audrey's arm, speaking to her urgently. Audrey had her back to me, so I couldn't see her expression. A second later, Julian spotted me. He pointed a finger at me, his face twisting into a hideous snarl. "I'm your real husband, Audrey. He's a shameless thief who stole you and our daughter." In an instant, every eye in the ballroom turned to me. The silence that followed Julian's screech was instantaneous, heavy, and absolute. In the ballroom of the St. Regis, where old money and ruthless ambition shared, the same polished marble floor, loud voices were considered a cardinal sin.
A
Drop of spilled vintage champagne usually commanded more discretion than an outright domestic explosion. Julian stood there, chest heaving beneath an ill-fitting, slightly wrinkled designer blazer he must have pulled from my old closet. His fingers were still, hooked like claws into Audrey's bare forearm. Audrey did not flinch. She did not scream. She did not even blink. Slowly, deliberately, she looked down at Julian's hand on her skin. The temperature in the room plummeted 10 degrees. "Let go of me," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the chilling, razor-edged clarity that had made boardroom executives twice her age sweat through their custom suits. Julian's face twitched. He was used to Audrey from 10 years ago, the free-spirited, rebellious heiress who played bass in a smoky underground dive bar, not the formidable chairwoman of Vance Enterprises. "Audrey, babe, it's me. Look at me. I had to leave back then, but I'm back for you. We can fix this." "Security," Audrey said cleanly, cutting him off without breaking eye contact. Two towering men in tailored charcoal suits appeared from the periphery like specters, their hands immediately gripping Julian's shoulders. "Take your hands off me," Julian snarled, writhing in their grasp. He looked across the room, locking his bloodshot eyes on me.
Ethan, tell them. Tell your
"Wife who I am. Tell everyone in this room that you're living on borrowed time in my shoes." The guests, hedge fund titans, senators, real estate moguls, turned their gazes between Julian and me. Whispers spread like brush fire behind raised crystal.
flutes.
I didn't rush. I set my empty glass on a passing waiter's tray and adjusted my
Cuffs.
10 years of surviving in Audrey's world had taught me one fundamental rule. Never let them see you bleed, and never let them see you rush. I walked across the floor, the rhythmic click of my Oxfords echoing against the marble. When I reached Audrey, I slipped my arm effortlessly around her waist. She leaned into my side, her posture relaxing just a fraction, presenting a united front. "Julian," I said calmly, my tone carrying the mild, patronizing concern one might give an erratic stranger on the subway. "If you are having a medical episode, we can have an ambulance called. But creating a disturbance at a Vance Enterprises charity gala is not the way to get help." Julian's eyes bulged with rage. "You little bastard. You were nothing. You were my shadow. Mom and Dad fed you my scraps, and now you think you're a king."
He
Spun toward the surrounding crowd, shouting desperately. "Ask him where he was on his wedding day. Ask him whose child he's raising. That girl in the lounge is my flesh and blood. He stole my bride, he stole my daughter, and he stole my name."
Audrey stepped forward then.
The sheer predatory grace in her movement caused the security guards to pause. She raised one manicured hand, signaling the security team to hold Julian steady. Then, she stepped into his personal space, her dark eyes looking down at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You speak of flesh and blood, Julian," Audrey whispered, her voice loud enough for the first 3 rows of socialites to hear clearly.
10 years ago, a
Terrified child was left shivering in a bassinet while you took $50,000 of my family's money and boarded a flight to Macau. You didn't leave because of pressure. You left because you were a coward, a parasite, and a thief." Julian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His face turned an ugly shade of
gray.
"The man standing next to me," Audrey continued, gesturing slightly toward me, without taking her eyes off Julian, "is Ethan Vance Hayes.
He didn't steal my
Life. He built it with me. He was there for every midnight fever Lily had, every board meeting where vultures try to strip this company, and every single day you spent rotting in European back alleys." She turned slightly, waving a dismissive hand at the guards. "Throw him onto the pavement. And if he sets foot within 500 yards of My husband, my daughter, or my property again. Execute the trespass injunctions. We drew up 10 years ago.
Audrey. No.
Ethan, you coward. Julian's screams were muffled as the guards dragged him backward through the service exit, the heavy brass doors thudding shut behind them. The ballroom remained utterly quiet for 3 long seconds. Audrey turned to the room, smoothing down the front of her gown. She lifted a glass from a nearby table, her face transforming instantly into a picture of radiant, aristocratic poise. Apologies for the interruption, ladies and gentlemen, she announced smoothly. Every family has its distant ghosts. Let us return to the reason we are here. Tonight, the Vance Foundation's pediatric wing. Applause rippled through the room, hesitant at first, then loud and admiring. The vultures had smelled blood, but the Iron Matriarch had just broken the predator's jaw. Audrey turned to me, her smile dazzling for the cameras, but beneath the fabric of her dress, I felt her hand trembling against my back. Take me home, Ethan, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the clinking glasses. Right now. The drive back to the estate in Greenwich was silent. Lily was asleep in the back seat of the Maybach, her head resting on a plush cashmere blanket, oblivious to the storm her biological father had tried to unleash. I kept my hands at 10 and 2 on the leather steering wheel, staring at the winding asphalt illuminated by the high beams. My jaw ached from clenching it. For 2 hours straight. When we pulled into the gated motor court, the staff quietly took Lily up to her bedroom. Audrey kicked off her Louboutins in the foyer, pouring 2 fingers of neat Macallan into a crystal tumbler. She didn't offer me one. She knew I didn't drink after midnight. He won't stop with tonight, I said, breaking the silence as I loosened my silk.
Dia.
Julian is like a stray dog that tasted meat once. He thinks because he was born first, the world owes him an inheritance. Audrey took a slow sip of the amber liquid. She stood by the grand fireplace, the flickering flames casting long, dancing shadows across her sharp cheekbones. Let him try, she said coldly. He has no money, no legal standing, and no allies. He has my parents, I reminded her, the bitterness leaking through despite my best efforts. And in the eyes of the law, 10 years ago, he was the one Lily's birth certificate initially listed before the court sealed and amended it. Audrey set her glass down with a sharp clack. She walked over to me, her silk robe billowing around her ankles, and stopped inches from my chest. Ethan, she said, her eyes boring into mine. Look at me. I met her gaze. Even after 10 years of sharing a bed, a breakfast table, and a boardroom, there were parts of Audrey Vance that felt like an impenetrable fortress. Do you remember what I told you in that dressing room 10 years ago? She asked.
Softly.
The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. 10 years ago. The smell of cheap lilies and frantic sweat in the bridal suite. My father's handprint still burning red on my cheek. The knife I had brandished. In pure, animal desperation lying discarded on the vanity. When everyone left the room, Audrey had locked the heavy oak door. She didn't
cry.
She sat on the velvet sofa, her designer wedding veil torn at the edges, and looked at me, a scrawny, 22-year-old Ethan in a borrowed suit. Julian didn't run away because he was scared of marriage, Ethan, she had said. Then, her voice eerily calm. He ran because 2 nights ago I caught him going through my father's safe in the penthouse. He stole the bearer bonds and tried to sell our trade secrets to the Sterling Group. I had stared at her in shock. Your parents think they're saving the family name by offering you up? Audrey had continued, rising to her feet and walking toward me. They think you're the disposable twin, the quiet one, the backup engine. She had reached out, her cool fingers lightly touching my bruised cheek where my father had struck me. I don't want Julian. Even if he crawled back on his knees right now, I would have him ruined. But I need a husband to secure my father's trust fund today. And you need an escape from the parasites who raised you. What do you want from me? I had croaked out, my voice raw. A partnership, she had said, offering her hand. You give me your absolute loyalty, your sharp mind, and a father for this child. In exchange, I will give you the keys to an empire. I will give you a name they can never touch. And 10 years from now, you will be so powerful that your parents and Julian will look up at you like you're a god. Back in the present, Audrey reached up, her cool fingers finding the exact same spot on my cheek. I didn't choose Julian 10 years ago, Ethan, she whispered, her thumb brushing my skin. Julian was an idiot boy I had a rebellious summer with before I realized what a parasite he was. I chose you. You built this house. You raised Lily. You made Vance Enterprises what it is. He thinks I stole his life, I murmured, my throat tightening. He never had a life to steal, Audrey replied fiercely. He had a shadow, and he threw it away. Now go up to bed. Tomorrow, the war begins. By 8 o'clock the next morning, the tabloids were already buzzing, while the premier financial outlets ignored the scene out of respect and fear. For the Vance legal team, the trashy digital gossip columns had a field day. Prodigal heir returns? Scandal at the Vance Gala as long-lost brother claims. Heir to billion-dollar throne. I was sitting in my corner office on the 48th floor of the Vance Tower, scanning the headlines on my tablet, when my personal assistant, Marcus, knocked nervously on the frosted glass door. Mr. Vance Hayes, Marcus said, swallowing hard. Your parents are downstairs in the lobby. They don't have an appointment, but they're refusing to
Leave.
They brought a man with them. Julian, I said without looking up from my coffee. Yes, sir. And an attorney. From Miller and Vance Associates. I raised an eyebrow. Miller was a bottom-feeding personal injury lawyer who had recently rebranded himself as a high-profile family advocate. A clown who chased cameras. Send them up to conference room C, I instructed calmly. And call down to General Counsel. Tell Mr. Harrison to bring the 2016 settlement files and the Ne de Abinders. Right away, sir. 5 minutes later, I walked into conference room C. The room was vast, dominated by a 30-foot slab of polished black granite, overlooking the Hudson River. On one side sat my mother, dabbing her dry eyes, with a monogrammed handkerchief, my father, looking rigid and self-righteous in an off-the-rack navy suit, and Julian, sitting between them with his feet arrogantly propped on an empty leather chair. Next to them was Arthur Miller, a slick man with too much hair gel and a cheap briefcase. Ethan, my mother gasped, standing up the moment I walked in. Thank God you let us up. Look at this place. Ethan, look what you've done with yourself. She moved to hug me, but I took a step back, letting my cold gaze fall on her outstretched arms until she lowered them awkwardly. Sit down, Eleanor, I said flatly. My father's face flushed purple. Eleanor? That is your mother, Ethan. Where are your manners? Just because you married into wealth doesn't give you the right to disrespect the people who raised you. The people who raised me tried to force me into a sham marriage at knife point 10 years ago to save their failing automotive part supplier, I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. Let's skip the family reunion melodrama.
Why?
Are you here? Julian swung his feet off the chair and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the granite. He had cleaned himself up slightly, but the frantic, desperate energy in his eyes was impossible to hide. We're here to negotiate your exit package, little brother, Julian sneered. Is that so? You've had 10 years of living like a king on my ticket, Julian said, tapping the table rhythmically. You had Audrey, you had the penthouse, you had the country club. But the ride's over. I'm Lily's biological father. Under New York law, I have parental rights. If I file for emergency custody and a paternity challenge, the Vance name will be dragged through the mud for the next 2 years. Arthur Miller cleared his throat, adjusting his gaudy gold cufflinks. What my client is proposing, Mr. Vance Hayes, is a confidential settlement. A full transfer of Mr. Julian's biological claims, signed custody relinquishment, and a non-disclosure agreement. And the price? I asked, resting my chin on steepled fingers. Julian smiled, a sickeningly wide grin. $50 million, plus 5% non-voting equity in the Vance Logistics subsidiary. And our parents' company gets the exclusive supply contract for Vance Automotive for the next 15 years. My father nodded vigorously, his eyes gleaming with greed. It's only fair. Ethan. Julian sacrificed 10 years of his youth abroad. Our family business has been struggling since the pandemic. You have billions at your fingertips.
What?
Is 50 million to you? It will restore our family. I looked at my mother. Do you agree with this? She looked down at her lap, unable to meet my eyes, but her voice was steady in its selfishness. Ethan, you've had so much. Julian has nothing. He's your older brother. You have to share. You have to share. The phrase echoed in my mind. Share your homework, Ethan. Share your bicycle, Ethan. Let Julian have the car. Tonight, Ethan, he has a date. Give Julian your college savings, Ethan, he needs to pay off his bookie. A slow, terrifying smile spread across my face. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was the smile of an executioner checking the sharpness of the blade. 50 million, I said softly. It's a very specific number, Julian. Almost. Exactly the amount you owe to the Petrov syndicate in Cyprus, isn't it? Julian's grin vanished instantly. The color drained from his face until his skin looked like wet parchment. What? Julian stammered. The conference room door swung open and Mr. Harrison, our 70-year-old chief legal officer, stepped inside. Behind him were two forensic accountants.
Carintique, Lederbund dossier.
They placed a folder in front of Julian, one in front of my father and one in front of Miller. 13 countries, Julian, I said, leaning back in my chair. You told Mom and Dad you were exhausted from traveling the world, experiencing culture, finding yourself. I flipped open my own copy of the dossier. Let's look at your itinerary, shall we? Year 1, Macau. You lost $400,000 in illicit baccarat dens. Year 3, London. You were arrested under an alias for identity fraud and skipped bail after a wealthy socialite refused to press charges out of embarrassment. Year 7, Monaco. Banned from every casino on the Côte d'Azur for running a counterfeit chip scam. And Year 9, Cyprus. You borrowed €2 million from an offshore loan sharking outfit tied to Russian organized crime.
With interest and
penalties, your current debt sits at roughly $42 million. Julian was shaking. Sweat beaded across his forehead, dripping down the bridge of his nose onto the glass table. You spied on me? Julian choked out. Audrey and I haven't just been running a business, Julian. We've been running an intelligence network, I said coldly. We knew where you were every single day of the last 7 years. We didn't bring you back because you were irrelevant. But the moment your creditors seized your passport in Athens last month, we knew you'd come crawling home to the only host you knew how to bleed. My father stared at the dossier in his hands, his fingers trembling as he read the police reports and debt warrants. Julian, is this true? You didn't start an international export business. Shut up, old man. Julian snapped viciously, turning on our father with raw venom. You think I wanted to run away? You pushed me to marry that Vance Ice Queen. You wanted their money so bad you sold me out. My father looked as if he had been slapped across the face. The son he had worshipped, the golden boy he had protected at my expense his entire life, was looking at him with utter disgust. I turned my attention to Arthur Miller. Mr. Miller, I said, my voice dropping to an icy whisper. You are representing a fugitive who currently has active red notices from Interpol for fraud in 3 jurisdictions. If you file a single piece of paper in New York Family Court, I will personally file an ethics complaint with the New York Bar Association, backed by forensic evidence that you accepted a retainer paid with laundered funds from Julian's Cypriot associates. Miller closed his briefcase with a loud snap, stood up without saying a single word, and walked out of the conference room, abandoning his clients on the spot. Ethan, my mother cried out, reaching across the table with trembling hands. Please, he's your brother. If those men find him, they'll kill him. Then he shouldn't have borrowed their money, I said, rising to my feet. You monster, my father bellowed, slamming his fists on the table. You have billions. You could pay this off with pocket change. We are your parents. We gave you life. You gave me a life of servitude to your favorite son, I replied, looking down at them from the head of the table. And 10 years ago, you traded me away like a piece of livestock to save your skin. The contract was completed the day I signed that marriage certificate. I looked at Julian, who was staring at the floor, his chest heaving with silent, terrified breaths. You have 48 hours to leave this country, Julian. If you are still in New York by Friday, I will personally hand this dossier to the U.S. Marshals and the Cypriot Embassy. You wouldn't, Julian whispered. Try me. I turned and walked toward the door. Just before I exited, I paused and looked back at my parents. Oh, and Dad? The supply contract between Vance Logistics and your auto parts company terminated as of noon today. We found 3 cheaper suppliers in Ohio. Have a good afternoon. The human ego is a strange, self-destructive machine. When cornered, an intelligent man retreats and looks for an escape hatch. A spoiled, arrogant man doubles down on his delusion. Julian did not flee the country. Instead, driven by desperation, panic, and a decade of unearned entitlement, he decided to strike at the only vulnerability he thought I had, Lily. It happened on a Thursday afternoon outside the prestigious St. Jude's Academy in Manhattan. The school was surrounded by black SUVs, private security, and wealthy parents, picking up their children. I was stuck in a board meeting regarding a hostile takeover of a European shipping conglomerate, so Audrey had sent our head of security, Dominic, to pick up Lily. Lily, at 9 years old, had Audrey's sharp, observant hazel eyes and an unnerving amount of emotional intelligence. She carried her cello case on her back, walking toward the gate where Dominic was waiting. Suddenly, a man burst through the line of waiting chauffeurs. Lily, Lily's sweetheart. Julian lunged forward, grabbing Lily by her coat sleeves. He looked manic, his hair disheveled, his eyes wild with terror, a man who had run out of time and options. "Let go of me," Lily cried out, dropping her cello case and pulling back with surprising strength. "Lily, it's Daddy. It's your real dad." Julian babbed, his grip tightening. "Don't listen to that fake Ethan. I made you. You belong with me. Come with me. We're going to get ice cream. We're going to fix everything." Before he could pull her 2 steps, a heavy hand clamped around Julian's wrist, like a vice, bending his joints backward until the cartilage popped. Julian screamed in agony, dropping to his knees. Dominic didn't say a word. He twisted Julian's arm behind his back, slammed him face first onto the pavement, and planted a steel-toed boot firmly between his shoulder blades. 2 other Vance security guards instantly stepped between the fallen man and Lily, forming an impenetrable human wall. "Lily, are you all right?" Dominic asked calmly, keeping all his weight on Julian's spine. Lily stood there, her coat slightly rumpled. She looked down at the man, groveling and sobbing beneath Dominic's boot. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She walked slowly over to where Julian was pinned against the concrete. "You're the man from the gala," Lily said, her voice small but steady. Julian turned his bruised cheek against the asphalt, tears and snot mixing on his face. "Lily, baby, I'm your father. Ask your mother. Look at my face. We have the same eyes." Lily looked at him with an expression that was terrifyingly identical to Audrey's. "My daddy drives me to school every morning," Lily said clearly. "My daddy taught me how to ride a bike when I scraped my knees. My daddy stayed up with me for 3 nights when I had pneumonia last winter." She adjusted her backpack and looked at Julian like he was a bug on the sidewalk. "You're just a noisy stranger. Dominic, please call the police. He's ruining my cello case." By 6 o'clock that evening, the story was completely over. Julian was sitting in a holding cell at the 19th precinct, charged with attempted felony kidnapping, assault, and violation of an existing restraining order. The NYPD had already been contacted by federal authorities regarding the Cypriot fraud warrants. There would be no bail. There would be no escape. At 7 o'clock, my parents arrived at the Vance Tower once more. They had not been invited up. They were sitting on the cold bench outside the lobby, their clothes soaked from a sudden autumn downpour. When Audrey and I walked out of the private elevator, flanked by 4 security guards, my parents scrambled to their feet. My father looked 10 years older. The arrogant patriarch who had slapped me across the face 10 years ago was gone. In his place was a broken, desperate old man whose life's work was crumbling to dust. "Ethan," he gasped, his voice trembling. "They won't let us see Julian. They say he's being extradited. Ethan, please. He'll die in a foreign prison. You have friends in the State Department. You can stop this." My mother fell to her knees right there on the granite floor of the lobby, grabbing the hem of my trousers. "Ethan, I'm begging you. As your mother. Punish us. Take our house. Take the business. But save your brother. He's your twin. You shared a womb." I looked down at her. 10 years ago, this sight would have torn my heart in 2. I would have felt the crushing weight of filial guilt, the agonizing urge to surrender my own happiness just to make them look at me with a fraction of the love they gave Julian. Now, I felt nothing. Not anger. Not triumph. Just a hollow, clean indifference. "You spent 20 years treating me like an organ donor for Julian's life," I said softly, looking down at my mother. "Whenever he failed, you took my success and gave it to him. Whenever he broke something, you made me pay for it. And when he ran away like a coward, you threw me into the fire to save yourselves." I gently pulled my trouser leg from her grasp. "You didn't raise 2 sons, Eleanor. You raised an idol, and you raised a sacrifice. But the sacrifice grew up, and the idol turned out to be made of mud." "Ethan, please," my father wept, tears streaming down his wrinkled cheeks. "We made mistakes. We were wrong. We admit it. We'll do anything. Just give us one More chance to be a family. Audrey stepped up beside me. She took my arm, resting her head lightly against my shoulder, her presence a wall of solid titanium against their pathetic pleas. You had 22 years of chances, Audrey said coldly to my father. And you wasted every single one. If either of you ever approaches my daughter, my husband, or this building again, I won't just let your company go bankrupt.
I
Will buy up your company's outstanding debt and liquidate your personal home to satisfy the arrears. She looked at the lobby security chief. Escort them out to the street.
if they
Linger on the sidewalk, have them cited for vagrancy. As the security guards pulled my parents toward the revolving doors, my father let out a wail of pure despair, the sound echoing through the cavernous marble atrium before being swallowed by the rainy Manhattan night. It was midnight when we finally returned to the estate. Lily was sound asleep in her room, exhausted from the day's events, with our private pediatrician confirming she had suffered no physical harm. Dominic and 2 extra guards were stationed at the perimeter gates. The house was completely still. I stood on the second-floor balcony, looking out over the manicured gardens.
The
rain had stopped, leaving behind a crisp, cold autumn breeze that carried the scent of wet earth and pine needles. The French doors creaked softly. Audrey walked out, wearing a thick cashmere cardigan over her silk pajamas.
she
Held 2 mugs of hot tea, handing one to me. Our fingers brushed. Her skin was warm. Julian's extradition paperwork was approved an hour ago, Audrey said quietly, leaning her forearms on the stone balustrade next to me. He'll be on a federal transport flight by tomorrow evening. He will never touch our lives again. I took a slow sip of the tea. The warmth spread through my chest, but the tension in my shoulders refused to dissipate. Ethan, Audrey said, turning her head to look at me in the moonlight. What is
it?
I stared out into the dark gardens. The question had been rotting in the back of my mind for 10 years, buried beneath corporate acquisitions, balance sheets, and polite smiles. But tonight, with the ghost of Julian finally banished to the shadows, the dam broke. Did you ever regret it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Audrey frowned slightly. Regret what? 10 years ago, I said, finally turning to face her. You fell in love with Julian first. You had a band with him. You had a summer with him. You had Lily. With him. When you pulled me into that dressing room, you were 22 and desperate to save your family from a scandal. For 10 years, I convinced myself that this was a transaction. That I was a reliable partner, a good manager for your assets, and a competent father for Lily. But I always thought, if Julian hadn't been a thief, if Julian had stayed, would you have been happier? Audrey stared at me. For a long moment, she didn't say a single word. Then, to my complete shock, she let out a soft, breathless laugh. She set her mug down on the stone railing, stepped directly in front of me, and took my face in both of her hands. Her touch was firm, warm, and entirely present. You idiot, she whispered, her eyes shining with something fierce and genuine. You brilliant, powerful, completely blind idiot. Audrey, do you really think my father and I would let a 22-year-old girl marry a complete stranger just because of a pregnancy scandal? She interrupted, her voice shaking with rare emotion. I blinked, stunned. 10 years ago, when Julian and I were playing in that stupid band, who do you think was fixing his broken amplifier cords? Audrey asked, her thumbs gently stroking my cheekbones. Who do you think was secretly dropping off dinner for him at the studio because he blew all his money on beer? Who do you think wrote the business plan for his indie label that he tried to pass off as his own? My breath hitched. I did that. I knew who you were long before that wedding day, Ethan, Audrey confessed, her eyes searching mine. I watched you work 3 jobs to pay your own way through college while your family gave everything to that useless clown. I watched you carry yourself with quiet dignity while everyone around you took advantage of your kindness. By the time Lily was born, I already despised Julian. He was shallow, selfish, and cruel. The night before the wedding, when I caught him stealing from my father's safe, I didn't cry because my heart was broken. I cried because I thought I was trapped with a monster. She pressed her forehead against mine, her breath warm against my lips. When Julian ran away that morning, it wasn't a tragedy for me, Ethan.
It was a
miracle. And when I saw you standing there in that hallway, refusing to be bullied by your father, ready to fight the whole world with a fruit knife just to keep your self-respect, I didn't see a substitute. I saw the only man in That entire house who was worth a damn. Tears, hot and unexpected, pricked the corners of my eyes. For 10 years, Audrey murmured, her lips brushing against mine, you treated this marriage like a business contract because you were afraid that if you let your guard down, you'd be thrown away like you were as a child. But I never wanted a business partner, Ethan. I wanted you. I have loved you since the day you put that ring on my finger and promised to protect our daughter. The invisible chains that had wrapped around my chest for 20 years. The feeling of being second best, the fear of being disposable, the ghost of Julian's shadow, shattered into dust. I dropped my mug onto the railing and wrapped my arms around Audrey's waist, pulling her flush against my body. I buried my face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the sweet, familiar scent of cherry blossoms, and kissed her with a ferocity that held 10 years of unspoken devotion. She kissed me back, her hands tangling in my hair, holding me as if I were the center of her universe. Because I was. 6 months later, the spring sun bathed the grand terrace of the Vance estate in golden light. The cherry blossom trees along the perimeter were in full, glorious bloom, scattering soft pink petals across the manicured green lawn. Lily was sitting at a glass patio table, diligently practicing her cello, the rich, melodious notes echoing through the afternoon air. Audrey sat on a sun lounger nearby, wearing an elegant cream linen suit, reviewing quarterly performance reports on her iPad with a cup of Earl Grey tea. I walked out through the French doors, carrying a plate of freshly cut fruit. Daddy, Lily called out, pausing her bow. Did you see my vibrato? Mr. Chen said I'm ready for the spring recital solo. I heard it from the study, sweetheart, I said, setting the fruit down and kissing the top of her head.
Flawless.
Just make sure you don't rush the tempo. In the third measure. I know, she giggled, grabbing a slice of apple before picking up her bow again. I walked over to Audrey and sat on the edge of her lounger. She naturally leaned against my shoulder, offering me a sip of her tea. Marcus sent the morning briefs, she murmured, showing me the screen.
Your
restructuring of the European logistics branch yielded a 14% increase in operating margins for Q1. The board is practically worshipping the ground you walk on. Let them, I said with a faint smile, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. As long as the stock price stays healthy. And there was a brief from Cyprus this morning, Audrey added casually. I paused, looking at her. Julian was sentenced to 8 years in a maximum security labor facility outside Nicosia for grand larceny and wire fraud, she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. Your parents officially declared bankruptcy last week. Their house in Queens was auctioned off by the bank. They've moved into a 1-bedroom, subsidized apartment in New Jersey. I listened to the news. There was no surge of petty satisfaction, no lingering pain, no phantom ache where my old wounds used to be. They were just names on a piece of paper. Strangers whose lives had diverged from mine 10 years ago. Are you all right? Audrey asked softly, her fingers gently interlacing with mine. I looked across the sunlit lawn. I looked at Lily, playing her cello with a bright, carefree smile on her face. I looked at the vast, beautiful home behind us, a home built on trust, intelligence, and 10 years of unyielding partnership. I looked down at Audrey, the woman who had seen the gold in me when the rest of the world only saw lead. I squeezed her hand, leaning down to press a soft, lingering kiss against her lips. I have never been better, I whispered. The spring breeze swept across the terrace, carrying away the last of the cherry blossom petals, leaving nothing behind but clear skies and an unshakable empire.